Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF.
Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, joined right now by Chuck Penner of Leftfield Commodity Research. Chuck, how are you?
Good, now that we've got the technology all sorted out.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Chuck, interesting piece you wrote talking about how the export destination of peas is shifting farmers' opportunity to price them and some of the patterns we're seeing in pricing. What's some of your research showing you?
Well, it's no secret to anybody that we have shifted our destinations largely to China, especially on yellow peas. And so it used to be, used to have this standard line that, India is the largest consumer and producer and importer of pulses. Well, they're still the largest consumer, they're still the largest producer, but they're not the largest importer anymore. And so, when you look at kind of what's going on, we've essentially lost India as a buyer. But that used to be all we would talk about is what's happening in India, what's going on, are they going to, all of those kind of questions, and for good reason, because they would be buying 60 to 70% of our peas every year. And so, yeah, if somebody burped over there, we had to know over here, and so that's become the case. But then in late 2017, they basically stopped. Or they impose such high tariffs and quantitative restrictions on peas that it's no longer a real market for us anymore. So that has been replaced by China, and in fact to an even larger degree. So China's a more dominant buyer of our peas than India ever was. So we need to think a little bit in terms of how they do that. Now, the big difference is that for India, they were much more seasonal buyers. So they would buy a whole lot of peas right off the combine. So September, October, November was massive for their purchases. And so that provided a different seasonal price behavior than what we're seeing now. So when China is in the market, they're buying for their fractionation plants, and they need, give or take, roughly the same amount every month. They're also buying for some feed, but that's a little bit of a different issue. But by and large, they're buying roughly the same amount every month. And so we don't have that massive demand or that huge bulge in demand that we would have kind of off the combine.
And how is it changing then some of the price activity that the farmers offered from some of the exporters?
Well, for the first, for one part, what they had is they had a situation where they would already start buying sometimes in October or November for the next year's delivery. So farmers would have this ability to be forward pricing their pulses already, while they're still just after they've harvested the last one. So, for example, so that would have given farmers the opportunity to price their 2020 crop in the fall of 2019. And that's largely not been the case the last couple of years. That's one difference. And so this year, for example, farmers' new crop prices for green peas and for yellow peas, really didn't start showing up until, I was going to say January, but probably even after that, February, March. So instead of being able to price in October, November, farmers haven't been able to do as much forward pricing. So there wasn't that kind of urgency in the market. Mm-hmm. So it was and buyers have, it's not related to this specifically, but buyers have become a lot more complacent when it comes to availability of Canadian pulses. So they'll go, well, I don't need to buy this month. I'll wait 2 or 3 months, see how things are turning out, and then I'll buy. So that's been a bit of a different issue as well, too. So there hasn't been that kind of thing. This year, because China has been buying on a more or less regular basis, our supplies are gradually being chewed up, and the price highs showed up much later in the season. So they showed up in March, April, a little bit in May as well too. So we had our seasonal highs then instead of earlier in the marketing year.
Which is a little bit closer in line with how we would expect other crops to behave, right? That spring rally. That's what we see in crops like canola, for example.
Yeah, because canola, again, buyers are buying them more or less steadily 12 months of the year. And then as supplies get worked lower, that's when prices will start to respond. So, that's peas and, well, then lentils as well, have been a very different animal because of that heavy off the combine purchases.
So China has been a nice replacement for some of the demand we had lost with India, as you mentioned. Could we see India, what would it take for India to come back to us and say, hey, we love Canadian peas as well?
Well, weather would help. That's always the case. And frankly, I think that is what will do it. Right now, what we're seeing in prices in India, they've almost stopped quoting pea prices at all in India, simply because there are none available. So they're just going through the roof, but too bad. You can't access them. You can't access that market. I think the last I saw, green pea prices were $1,600 US per ton. But
wow,
you can't do anything about it. You can't touch that market. So they've been going through the roof. So their supplies are really being drawn down, and so are their supplies of Desi chickpeas, which is the substitute for yellow peas. So those supplies have been drawn down. So those prices have been ugly in India for probably about 2 years. So those prices are also starting to tick higher. So what that tells me is that their supplies, their inventories of Desi chickpeas and of peas are getting considerably smaller. They'll start planting their next crop of those crops of chickpeas and peas and lentils in November. And so if farmers there, I think they'll have decent soil moisture to plant into and all of those kind of things. But it'll really depend with government inventories kind of running on fumes right now. If they don't have a big crop right then I think they'll be forced to open up their market again. So it'll really depend on weather, and I would say December, January, February, that time frame, those months in India.
Can we trust the longevity of the Chinese demand for Canadian peas?
I think so. It's impossible to predict Chinese government actions, because they can be a little, how we say, vindictive in the way that they approach the markets. But in terms of demand, it's grown steadily year over year over year to China. So every year their demand ticks higher. And in this year, as we're looking at just specifically at this year, there's also the chance that their own domestic production of peas, which is generally about 1.5 million tons a year, may have been hit by all of that flooding and so on that's been going on in China this year. So they may need even more. So what we know through the first 7 months of 2020 is that they're already buying at a record pace by a considerable margin. So, are they going to slow down? I kind of don't think so. Not over the short term. Over, the 2 years from now, 3 years from now, I can't predict that. But over this year anyway, there's no signs that they're slowing down. And in fact, they've been ramping up their buying. So
if I'm looking at the pea market right now, don't get too frustrated. Realize that some of the pricing patterns have changed, and I guess just be constantly looking at the market and seeing where those prices are on a weekly basis or monthly basis, and realizing that things have shifted.
Yeah, we're still at, the seasonal lows, regardless of the changes, the seasonal lows are still right at harvest time, and they always will be, because that's when the selling is the heaviest. So yeah, I tell people, don't get spooked into pricing at the seasonal lows, because it happens almost every year. How much response we get out of that is going to, could vary, or how quick the response is. I think, like we were saying, I think the response will be slower this year, so we won't see the quick turn higher. And it is going to be different for greens versus yellows, because greens farmers planted, up their acres quite a bit here. So, greens aren't going to respond the same way. And then I think yellows will be the stronger component. And it's possible even later in the season that yellows could be at a premium to greens. Possible.
Which is
before.
But it's uncommon.
Uncommon, but it's happened before. Yeah. And if it gets too far out of whack, then you will see China actually buying greens for their fractionation as well too. So it helps out. Yeah.
Makes sense. Hey, Chuck, really appreciate it.
All right, Shaun. Talk to you later.